We often see economists on TV, talking about the latest GDP figures or maybe predicting the next recession.
Hmm.
But have you ever stopped to think about just how far the reach of economics actually extends?
Right.
It's really not just about money and markets. It seems to shape, well, everything from environmental regulations to healthcare options.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've pulled together a pretty diverse set of sources, things like government reports outlining roles, university program details, career path analyses,
Okay.
to really get under the hood and see what economists actually do, in the real world, far beyond those sort of headline-grabbing forecasts.
So our mission in this deep dive, then, is to give you a clear picture of the maybe surprising variety of roles economists play and the essential skills they bring.
Yeah, moving past that narrow view.
Exactly. We want to move past that idea of them as just number crunchers and show the real breadth and depth of their impact. Okay, so to start, what is economics at its core? What are we actually talking about here?
Well, at its heart, economics is really about understanding how we make decisions, especially when we have limited resources, but, unlimited wants.
Limited resources, okay.
Every choice we make, every decision a business or a government makes about using things like time, money, materials, that's basically the territory of economics. It gives us a framework for analyzing those trade-offs.
So it's much bigger than just, say, personal finance then.
Oh, precisely, yeah. While personal finance is definitely an application of economic principles, economics as a field is, well, it's a social science.
Right.
It's about studying how people, organizations, how they behave within an economy. We're trying to figure out why they make the choices they do, how they interact, and what happens as a result.
And data plays a pretty big role in all of this, I assume, not just theory.
Oh, fundamental. Data is absolutely fundamental. Economists use data to see how the economy is doing, things like job numbers or how much stuff we're producing. And also to build models that help us anticipate what might happen if we make different choices. It's really about using evidence to understand and, well, to make better predictions.
So it's about digging into the why behind economic events. Like, why do some products suddenly cost more? What causes unemployment to rise or fall?
Exactly. Yep. Economists explore questions around the price of everything, job availability, the cyclical nature of economies, the booms and busts,
Right.
the effects of taxes, and of course, inflation, that sort of persistent rise in prices. And what's fascinating is how interconnected all these seemingly different aspects of the economy really are.
Now, you mentioned forecasts earlier, and if you picture an economist, you probably do see someone talking about stock markets or interest rates on like a financial news channel.
Yeah, that's the common image.
But our sources really emphasize that this is a very, very limited view of what they actually do.
That's spot on. The image of an economist as purely a financial market guru or an inflation predictor is common, mostly because those topics are so visible in the news.
Sure, they make headlines.
Exactly. But that's really just a tiny sliver of a much larger and more diverse field. Economists are involved in, well, an astonishing range of careers.
Okay, let's start with a really significant area then.
Yeah.
Government and public policy. How do economists actually contribute here?
Well, economists bring a really crucial lens to public policy. They analyze incentives, trade-offs, they try to predict how people might respond to new rules or programs,
Okay.
and they rigorously evaluate whether policies are actually working. These are insights often missed by, say, purely legal or political perspectives. They are, frankly, fundamental in shaping and assessing policy at all levels of government.
And our sources gave some great Australian examples of this. Can you maybe tell us about a few?
Certainly. Take the Treasury, for example. Economists there are constantly evaluating fiscal policy.
Right. Government spending and tax.
Exactly, how the government uses its budget. They also manage the government's budget settings and look at the big picture, the macroeconomic conditions of Australia. Then you have the Reserve Bank of Australia, the RBA. Their economists conduct vital research on things like inflation, monetary policy.
That's interest rates and money supply.
That's the one. Managing interest rates, money supply to control inflation and support growth. They also look heavily into the housing market and the overall stability of our financial system.
And it's not just these big national bodies, right? It happens at other levels too.
No, absolutely not. The Productivity Commission is another key example. They do these really in-depth investigations into factors affecting Australia's national productivity, things like how regulations work, social policy impacts.
Interesting.
And then at the state level, in places like the NSW Treasury or the Department of Transport Victoria, economists are essential for assessing the value of major infrastructure projects, planning state budgets, and figuring out if government policies are actually achieving their stated goals.
Wow. It sounds like working in these roles offers a real opportunity to have a tangible impact on people's lives.
Precisely, yeah. Working as an economist in the Australian Public Service, the APS, for instance, it gives you a chance to directly serve the community. You're contributing to policies designed to improve overall well-being.
How do they do that day to day?
It involves a lot of research, analyzing data to understand how policies affect areas like education, training, health, conducting macroeconomic analysis, industry analysis, all to inform government decisions.
And this analysis covers a lot of ground based on what we've seen in the sources.
It really does. APS economists analyze and advise on a huge range of economic and social issues. Everything from the impact of taxes and prices to understanding employment and unemployment trends, international trade, the effects of interest rates, exchange rates.
Okay.
They're also heavily involved in economic forecasting to help the government plan, and crucially, developing policy recommendations aimed at making the economy stronger, fairer. Things like cost-benefit analysis, weighing up the pros and cons, and evaluating how effective existing programs are, that's also a big part of their work.
So from the really high-level sort of bird's-eye view of the national economy, right down to figuring out if a specific local program is actually delivering results, that's quite a spectrum.
It really is.
Now, what about outside of government? Consulting seems like another significant area for economists.
It is, definitely. Economic consultants use all those principles: market efficiency, game theory, econometrics, which is basically using statistics on economic data
Right.
to give strategic advice. Things like pricing, investment decisions, understanding regulatory impacts. They offer a level of analytical rigor that often goes beyond standard business consulting. They use their skills to provide data-driven insights, sophisticated economic models for all sorts of clients.
But we saw some well-known Australian firms mentioned in our sources, didn't we?
Yes, absolutely. Major firms like Deloitte Access Economics, Ernst & Young EY, KPMG, PwC, they all have substantial economics teams.
Right, the big four.
Exactly. They're frequently involved in creating economic models to understand consequences of different decisions, doing cost-benefit analyses for big projects, assessing the economic impact of new regulations, providing forecasts to help businesses plan ahead.
It sounds like businesses really rely on this kind of economic thinking to make, well, smarter choices.
Absolutely. And it's not just the big four. There are also independent consultancies, firms like Macromonitor, Alpha Beta, Sapere Research Group, that offer more specialized economic advice, particularly in specific sectors like infrastructure, healthcare, education, energy.
Okay. Shifting focus a bit, maybe beyond Australia now, our sources also highlighted important work economists do in international organizations and NGOs. What kind of contributions are they making there?
Well, in those roles, economists contribute to tackling, really big global challenges, particularly international development.
Okay.
They monitor global economic trends, they help design programs aimed at reducing poverty, and they advise on policies that promote sustainable economic growth, improve living standards worldwide. It's very impact-focused work.
And presumably, we have examples of Australians working in this international sphere, too.
Indeed, yeah. Many Australian economists find really fulfilling careers with organizations like the Asian Development Bank, ADB, the World Bank, various UN agencies, and AUSADE, which is now part of DFET, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, also employs economists. Their focus is often on ensuring foreign aid is effective, shaping trade policy, working on broader economic development initiatives.
It's fascinating to see how that economics background can be applied to such critical global issues. Now, for those who are maybe more drawn to in-depth research, developing new ideas, academia seems like the obvious path.
Absolutely. Universities, research institutions, they're essential for pushing the frontiers of economic theory, conducting rigorous empirical research, really deepening our understanding of how economies actually function.
And Australia has a strong tradition here, doesn't it, in economic research and education?
It does, yeah. Leading universities like the University of Melbourne, ANU, University of Sydney, UNSW, they're home to many influential economists. They teach the next generation, but they also conduct cutting-edge research.
And it's not just universities.
No, you also have think tanks and research institutes. Places like the Grattan Institute or the Center for Independent Studies, they play a vital role, too, producing policy-relevant research, contributing to public debates through reports and papers.
So they're not just sort of locked away in lecture halls. They're actively involved in shaping public discourse and policy through their research.
Very much so.
Okay, what about the private sector? Where might we find economists working day-to-day in businesses?
The private sector offers a huge range of opportunities. They get involved in analyzing markets, understanding consumer behavior, industry trends,
Right.
developing sophisticated financial models for forecasting, assessing risk, creating pricing strategies to maximize profits, and increasingly using their analytical skills in data science roles.
And our sources provided some specific examples of industries in Australia, right?
Yes, the finance industry is obviously a major employer. Banks like NAB, ANZ, Westpac, they have teams of economists forecasting key indicators, interest rates, inflation, property market trends.
Sure.
But it goes well beyond finance. Energy companies, telcos, transportation firms, they hire economists too, often to navigate complex regulations or conduct investment analysis. Even superannuation and insurance funds rely on economists for assessing macroeconomic risks and deciding how to allocate assets.
It really sounds like any industry dealing with significant resources or needing to make strategic long-term plans could benefit from having an economist on board.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, this next area is particularly interesting, especially given all the tech advancements we're seeing.
Yeah.
Data science and tech.
Yes, this is an increasingly important and, frankly, rapidly expanding field for economists. With the explosion of big data, there's a huge demand for professionals who can not only work with and analyze these massive data sets, but also understand the underlying economic principles at play. Economists who have strong quantitative skills, programming skills languages like R, Python, Stata, SQL, they're highly sought after as data scientists, quantitative analysts.
So it's not just about knowing how to code then, it's the economic way of thinking that makes them valuable in these roles.
Precisely. That's the key differentiator. Economists bring a critical perspective to these data-driven environments. They understand things like causal inference, figuring out not just if two things are related, but whether one actually causes the other, which is absolutely crucial for effective policy or business decisions.
All right, cause versus correlation.
Exactly. Plus, their ability to evaluate the impact of different actions, their understanding of how people behave in response to incentives, behavioral economics insights, this lets them draw much more meaningful and actionable insights from data than someone perhaps without that grounding.
It's fascinating how those fundamental economic principles remain so relevant even in these really cutting-edge tech fields.
They really do.
And finally, our sources touched on economists in media and communication. That might not be the most obvious career path for an economics grad.
It's a vital role, though, perhaps less immediately apparent, but really important. Economists who can effectively communicate complex economic ideas to the general public, well, they play a crucial role in promoting understanding and informed public debate.
How might they do that?
It could be through journalism, writing accessible policy briefs, appearing on podcasts like this one, providing expert commentary in the news media, making economics less intimidating.
And we do have a prominent Australian example of this.
We do, yeah. Ross Gittins, for instance, highly respected economics commentator for the Sydney Morning Herald. He has a real knack for explaining complex economic issues in a way that's understandable to a wide audience.
Okay, so we've seen this incredibly wide range of career possibilities. Now, for someone maybe listening who's considering studying economics, what are some of the key skills and knowledge areas they should really focus on developing?
Well, our sources highlight several crucial skills. Strong analytical and quantitative abilities are absolutely foundational,
Makes sense.
as is the ability to communicate clearly, persuasively, both in writing and verbally. That's often underestimated. Familiarity with software tools like Excel and increasingly R, Python, Stata is becoming really important.
Right, the technical side.
Yep. And beyond that, a solid understanding of how policies, markets, institutions actually work is key. Plus, the ability to interpret data, visualize it, engage effectively with different stakeholders, and manage projects. It's a mix of hard and soft skills.
And what about the necessary educational background? What kind of qualifications are typically needed to actually become an economist?
Generally, a bachelor's degree or a higher qualification is the typical starting point, usually in economics, econometrics, commerce, or a related field. This aligns with what's called Skill Level 1 in the ANZ SEO framework.
Okay, that's the standard classification.
Yeah, it's the Australian and New Zealand standard indicates the typical skill level required. However, it's also worth noting that sometimes significant relevant experience, maybe 5 years or so, can be considered as a substitute for a formal qualification at that level in some cases.
And it seems like postgraduate study is quite common among economists based on the data.
It is very common. The data we looked at from NSW, for example, indicated that a significant majority, actually over 50%, hold a postgraduate qualification,
Wow.
with around 43% holding a bachelor's degree as their highest. So it really underscores the value placed on advanced education in many areas of economics.
Okay. And finally, looking specifically at New South Wales again, do we have a sense of just how many economists there are and which industries tend to employ them there?
Yes, the data gives us a bit of a snapshot. Nationwide, there are just under 5,000 economists counted,
Okay.
and a significant chunk, about 30%, are based in NSW. The profession is also projected to grow, which is positive, around 14.6% predicted growth over the next few years.
That's pretty healthy growth.
It is. The median age is about 40, and roughly 20% work part-time. And the median weekly earnings before tax in NSW were around $1,850, though it's important to remember that a median actual earnings can vary a lot depending on experience, sector, specific role.
Sure, of course. And in terms of where economists in NSW are working, are there particular industries that stand out?
Yeah, the key related industries mentioned were education and training, public administration and safety, so government roles, professional, scientific, and technical services, which includes consulting, and financial and insurance services.
Okay.
So again, it just highlights that diverse range of sectors that really rely on the skills and knowledge of economists.
So wrapping this up then, it's really clear that the popular image of economists, the forecaster on TV, it really doesn't do justice to the sheer breadth of their work.
Exactly. Not at all. They are fundamentally analytical thinkers. They apply their skills across this huge range of sectors to understand the forces shaping our world and, crucially, to inform important decisions at all levels.
From influencing government policy and giving strategic advice to businesses, to contributing to solutions for global development challenges, and even making sense of big data, the career paths available seem incredibly diverse.
Yeah, offering potential for real, meaningful impact in so many different fields.
Absolutely.
And maybe this brings up a final thought for you listening. Consider the everyday decisions and policies that affect your life. Things you see around you. Chances are an economist played some role in shaping them, even if it's not obvious. So what underlying assumptions might be at play in those decisions? And what different insights could an economic perspective actually offer? It's a really fascinating lens through which to view the world around us.